Reyna had learned to make herself invisible over 7 years of slavery, had perfected the art of moving through the silver mines without drawing attention from the guards or the other captives. She kept her white blonde hair hidden beneath a gray scarf that was more dirt than fabric, kept her pale skin covered despite the suffocating heat of the underground tunnels, kept her gray-blue eyes fixed on the ground so no one would see the spark of defiance she hadn't quite managed to extinguish. Slaves who drew attention didn't last long in the Ironwood Pack, and Reyna had survived this long by being forgettable, invisible, nothing worth noticing. Tonight she was on inspection duty in the deep mines, a task given only to the most trusted slaves because it meant being alone in the dark tunnels where escape might be possible if you were stupid enough to try. Reyna had learned years ago that escape was a fantasy. Every pack within 200 miles had agreements with Ironwood to return runaway slaves. The forest was full of rogues who'd kill a lone Omega for sport. And even if by some miracle she made it to neutral territory, what then? She had no pack, no family, no resources. She was marked as property, literally, with the brand on her left shoulder that burned every time she shifted. Running would just mean dying tired instead of dying here, and at least here she knew what to expect. She carried her lantern through the deepest tunnels, checking support beams and marking areas where the rock looked unstable. The Ironwood Pack had gotten rich off these silver mines, rich enough to challenge even the great packs for territory and influence. They worked their slaves until they dropped and then just captured more. An endless supply of Omegas and low-ranking Betas from packs they'd destroyed in territorial disputes. Reyna had been one of those unfortunates, captured at 15 when the Ironwood Wolves had massacred her entire pack over a river border disagreement. She tried not to think about that day, about her parents, both Betas, who died fighting to protect the pack's Omegas and children. About her little brother Marcus, only 8 years old, who'd survived the massacre only to die 6 months later from lung sickness brought on by the mine's bad air and worse conditions. About the life she'd been supposed to have, the future that had been stolen when Ironwood's Alpha had decided a river was worth more than peace. The sound hit her as she passed the sealed section, the tunnels that had been closed off 3 years ago after a collapse killed 5 slaves. It was faint at first, almost lost in the constant drip of water and creak of settling rock. But Reyna had learned to hear things others missed, had developed her senses to compensate for 7 years of looking at the ground instead of meeting anyone's eyes. It was a whimper, pained and desperate, coming from behind the sealed passage. Reyna stopped walking, her heart suddenly pounding hard enough that she could feel it in her throat. Nothing should be back there. The sealed section was unstable and dangerous, marked with warnings that even the guards respected. No one went back there. Nothing lived back there. But that sound came again, weaker this time, and Reyna's hands tightened on her lantern handle. She should keep walking, should finish her inspection and return to the slave quarters and pretend she'd heard nothing. Getting involved in things that weren't her business was a good way to end up dead, and she'd survived 7 years by following that exact principle. But something in that whimper called to her wolf, the part of her that 7 years of slavery hadn't managed to completely break. The part that still remembered what it meant to be pack, to help those who were suffering, to choose compassion even when survival said otherwise. The barricade across the sealed section was old and poorly maintained. The wooden boards rotted enough that Reyna could pull them aside with minimal effort. The guards were lazy about checking the deep mines, confident that slaves were too afraid of punishment to explore forbidden areas. They were usually right. But Reyna had already decided that if she was going to die in these mines, she'd rather die doing something that mattered than waste away from silver poisoning and despair. The tunnel beyond the barricade was in worse shape than she'd expected, the walls showing cracks and the ceiling sagging in places that made her nervous. She moved carefully, testing each step before putting her full weight down, holding her lantern high to illuminate the path ahead. The whimper came again, louder now, echoing off the stone walls in a way that made it impossible to tell exactly where it originated. But Reyna followed it deeper into the abandoned section, past collapsed scars and around corners that probably should have made her turn back. She found him in what had once been an interrogation chamber, a room the guards had used for particularly stubborn slaves before the section was sealed. The room was small and windowless, with iron rings set into the walls and dark stains on the floor that Reyna didn't want to examine too closely. And in the center of that horrible room, covered in silver chains so thick and heavy they looked like they weighed more than she did, was the largest white wolf she'd ever seen. Reyna froze in the doorway, her lantern light falling across a scene that made her stomach twist with horror and rage. The wolf was massive, easily 4 feet tall at the shoulder even lying down, with thick white fur that should have been pristine, but was instead matted with blood and burned black where the silver touched his skin. The chains wrapped around his entire body, neck to tail, paws to torso, so many layers that she couldn't see how he was still breathing under the weight. Silver smoke rose from every point of contact, the metal actively burning through fur and flesh, and the smell of burning hair and meat made Reyna's eyes water. But it was the runes carved into the chains that made her blood run cold. She recognized the symbols from her grandmother's stories, tales about the old magics that most packs had abandoned centuries ago. These were binding runes, meant to prevent shifting and drain energy, dark magic that was outlawed by the Council of Alphas for being too cruel even for prisoners of war. Someone hadn't just chained this wolf with silver. They'd ensured he couldn't escape, couldn't shift to heal, couldn't do anything but suffer and die slowly in this forgotten room. The wolf's eyes cracked open as her light hit him, ice-blue irises that glowed even in the dimness. He looked at her with such pain and desperation that Reyna felt her heart crack in her chest. His breath came in shallow pants, each inhale obviously agonizing, and she could see his ribs through his burned fur. He'd been here for days at least, maybe longer, left to die in the dark where no one would hear him scream. She should leave, should run back to her assigned area and forget she'd ever found him. This was clearly a prisoner, someone important enough to warrant this level of torture, which meant the Ironwood Pack wanted him dead. Helping him would be treason, would earn her an execution so brutal it would make her 7 years of slavery look merciful. But looking into those ice-blue eyes, seeing the intelligence and pain and desperate hope in them, Reyna found she didn't care about the consequences anymore. "I'm going to help you," she whispered, setting down her lantern and approaching slowly. "I don't know if you can understand me, but I'm going to get these chains off. Just hold on." The wolf made a sound between a whimper and a whine, his eyes never leaving her face. Up close, he was even more magnificent, his features too refined and powerful to be a normal wolf. This was a shifter, she was sure of it, trapped in his animal form by the binding runes and too weak to shift back even if the magic allowed it. A shifter with fur this white and pure, with a build this massive, with eyes this striking, had to be from one of the great packs. And if he was important enough to torture like this, he was probably important enough that his pack was looking for him. Reyna reached for the first chain and felt the familiar tingle in her palms that she'd learned to hide since childhood. Silver didn't burn her the way it burned other wolves. Her grandmother had called it a blessing from the moon goddess, had told her stories about the silver-blessed who appeared once in a generation with the ability to handle the metal that was poison to their kind. Her parents had called it a curse and made her promise never to tell anyone, knowing that such a rare gift would make her a target for those who'd exploit it. The Ironwood Pack didn't know about her resistance. She'd hidden it carefully, had pretended to suffer from silver poisoning like everyone else, had worn gloves whenever she worked near the metal. If they'd known she could touch it without burning, they would have worked her even harder, probably until the constant exposure killed her anyway. But right now, in this moment, her secret was the only thing that could save this wolf's life. The chains were thick and heavy, industrial-grade silver meant to hold even the strongest shifter. Reyna couldn't break them with strength alone, but she'd spent 7 years in these mines and knew where the tools were kept. She ran back to the main tunnel and grabbed a set of bolt cutters from the supply cache, along with a hacksaw and a pry bar. The tools were heavy and awkward, Not meant for someone her size, but desperation gave her strength she didn't know she had. She worked for 40 minutes, her hands cramping and bleeding from the effort, sweat dripping into her eyes as she cut and pried and broke chain after chain. The wolf stayed perfectly still, only his labored breathing and occasional whimper indicating he was even conscious. Reyna talked to him while she worked, a constant stream of reassurance and encouragement, telling him to hold on, promising him freedom, begging him not to give up. She didn't know if he understood her words, but she couldn't work in silence, couldn't bear the weight of what she was doing without the sound of her own voice to ground her. The binding runes made the work harder. Every chain she removed seemed to be replaced by the magic pulling tighter on the remaining ones, like the spell was trying to compensate for the loss. But Reyna was stubborn, had learned persistence from 7 years of surviving what should have killed her, and she refused to quit. The wolf had suffered enough. He deserved freedom, deserved the chance to heal, deserved better than dying alone in the dark. When the last chain finally fell away with a metallic clatter that echoed through the chamber, the wolf took his first full breath in what must have been days. His whole body shuddered with the inhale, his chest expanding properly for the first time since she'd found him. His eyes opened wider, and he looked at her with something that made Reyna's breath catch. Recognition, gratitude, and something else. Something deeper that she didn't have time to analyze. She started gathering the chains, trying to hide the evidence of what she'd done. The guards would check the mines in less than 15 minutes, and if they found her here with a freed prisoner, her death would be inevitable and agonizing. The wolf needed to leave, needed to get out of Ironwood territory before anyone realized he was free, and she needed to return to her quarters and pretend this had never happened. "You need to go," she said urgently, backing toward the door. "Get up, run. Get as far from here as you can before they realize you're gone." The wolf struggled to his feet, his legs shaking badly, his burned skin still smoking in places where the silver had done the most damage. He was weak, probably too weak to make it far, but she couldn't help with that, couldn't risk being caught, couldn't throw away 7 years of careful survival for a stranger, no matter how much her heart screamed at her to do exactly that. She turned to leave and froze when she heard his voice, rough and deep and absolutely human, despite coming from a wolf's throat. "Wait." Reyna spun back around and found the wolf was no longer a wolf. In his place stood a man, naked and covered in silver burns and dried blood, tall enough that he had to duck slightly to avoid hitting his head on the low ceiling. His hair was platinum blonde, hanging to his shoulders in tangled waves that somehow still looked majestic. His face was all sharp angles and strong bones, with a jaw that could cut glass and lips that were twisted with pain. His body was pure muscle, broad shoulders tapering to a narrow waist and long legs, though he was clearly malnourished from days without food or water. But it was his eyes that made Reyna's heart stop. Ice blue, pale and striking, looking at her with an intensity that made her want to both run and stay. And she recognized those eyes, had seen them in drawings, and heard them described in the terrified whispers of guards who thought slaves weren't listening. She'd just freed Sterling, the Alpha King of the Northern Crown Pack, the most powerful alpha in 500 miles. The wolf who'd been at war with Ironwood for 3 years over territorial disputes and Ironwood's refusal to stop slave trading. The king who'd come to negotiate a peace treaty 5 days ago and hadn't been seen since. The Ironwood guards had been bragging about capturing him, about how he'd walked into their territory under a white flag of truce and they'd betrayed that trust to take him prisoner. And she'd just cut him loose. Sterling took a shaking step toward her, his legs barely supporting his weight, his hand reaching out like he wanted to touch her, but was giving her the choice to move away. "You freed me," he said, his voice raspy from days of screaming. "You touched silver to save me. You risked your life for a stranger." Reyna backed up until her shoulders hit the wall, her mind racing with panic and implications. "You need to go," she said, forcing the words past her tight throat. "Right now. The guards check the deep mines every 2 hours. If they find you here, if they know I helped you, they'll kill everyone in the slave quarters. Every Omega, every child, everyone. You need to leave before anyone realizes you're gone." Sterling shook his head slowly, his ice-blue eyes never leaving her face. "I'm not leaving without you. You're mine now. By law of the moon goddess and right of life debt, you belong to me. Where I go, you go." The words hit Reyna like a physical blow. She'd spent 7 years as property, 7 years being owned and controlled and treated like an object instead of a person. She'd dreamed of freedom, of being able to make her own choices, of belonging to no one but herself. And this man, this king she'd just saved, was claiming ownership of her like she was a prize he'd won. "I don't belong to anyone," she said, her voice shaking with anger and fear. "I'm not your property. I saved your life because it was the right thing to do, not because I wanted a new master." Something flickered in Sterling's eyes, an emotion she couldn't quite read. "I didn't mean it like that," he started, then swayed on his feet, his legs finally giving out. Reyna moved without thinking, catching him before he could hit the ground, her arms wrapping around his waist as she tried to support his much larger weight. He was burning up with fever, his skin hot to the touch where it wasn't covered in silver burns, his breathing labored. "You're going to die if you don't get help," she said, adjusting her grip to keep him upright. "Can you walk? Can you make it to the surface?" Sterling's arm came around her shoulders, using her as a crutch as he tried to stand. "I can walk, but I'm not leaving you here. If the guards realize what you've done, they'll kill you. You're coming with me." "I can't," Reyna said desperately, already helping him toward the door despite her words. "The other slaves. They'll punish everyone for this. They'll make examples. I have friends here, people I care about. I can't just abandon them." "Then we'll come back for them," Sterling said, his weight heavy against her side. "After I've recovered, after I've gathered my warriors, we'll free every slave in these mines and burn Ironwood territory to the ground. But first, I need to get you somewhere safe." They stumbled through the tunnels together, Reyna supporting as much of Sterling's weight as she could manage while trying to navigate the unstable passages. Every sound made her heart race, every shadow made her think guards were coming. But somehow they made it back to the main mining shaft, to the lift that would take them to the surface. The night air hit them like a wall when they emerged, cold and clean after the stifling heat of the mines. Sterling breathed deeply, his eyes closing for a moment, as if savoring the feeling of fresh air in his lungs. Around them, the Ironwood Pack's compound was quiet, most wolves asleep at this late hour, only a few guards on patrol, and none of them near the mine entrance. "My territory is 3 days north," Sterling said quietly, his hand tightening on Reyna's shoulder. "If we can make it to the border, my wolves will scent me and come. We just need to survive that long." Reyna thought about the slave quarters, about the 20 other Omegas who'd become her family over 7 years. About old Maya who'd taught her to read using scratches in the dirt. About young Finn, who was only 12 and still believed he might see his parents again someday. About River and Asher, the bonded pair who'd managed to survive together by protecting each other. If she left with Sterling, if the guards discovered what she'd done, those wolves would suffer for her choices. But looking at Sterling, seeing the determination in his eyes despite his weakness, feeling the way his hand trembled where it gripped her shoulder, she realized she couldn't let him die either. He was important, not just to himself, but to thousands of wolves who lived in his territory. His death would mean war, would mean more destruction and death and suffering. And maybe, just maybe, if she helped him get home, he'd keep his promise to come back for the others. 10 minutes, she said firmly. "Give me 10 minutes to warn my friends, to tell them to run before you bring your army back here, please." Sterling studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. 10 minutes, but if anyone tries to stop you, if anyone threatens you, you scream and I'll kill them. Understood? Reyna didn't waste time arguing. She ran to the slave quarters, a long, low building at the edge of the compound, and slipped inside as quietly as possible. Most of the slaves were asleep, exhausted from 16-hour shifts in the mines. But Maya was awake, sitting by the small window like she always did on clear nights, watching the stars she'd probably never see from anywhere but this prison. "Maya," Reyna whispered urgently, shaking the old woman's shoulder. "Listen to me carefully. I freed the Northern Crown's king from the deep mines. He's alive, and I'm helping him escape. When the guards realize he's gone, they're going to punish everyone here looking for who helped him. You need to wake everyone up and run, right now. Take the children and the elderly who can travel and get as far from here as possible." Maya's eyes went wide, her wrinkled hand gripping Reyna's wrist with surprising strength. "Child, what have you done?" "What I had to," Reyna said, already moving to wake the others. "He's going to come back. He's going to bring his army and free everyone and destroy this place. But you need to survive until then, so run, please." She woke as many as she could in the time she had, whispering urgent warnings and directions to flee. Some believed her immediately and started gathering what few possessions they had. Others thought she'd gone mad from silver poisoning. A few were too sick or too old to move, resigned to whatever fate had in store. But Reyna did what she could, gave them the choice she'd been given, and then returned to Sterling before her 10 minutes were up. He was leaning against the mine entrance, his legs shaking with the effort of staying upright, but his eyes tracked her movement with sharp awareness. Did they listen? "Some of them," Reyna admitted, moving to his side to support him again. "The ones who could run will run. The ones who can't will face whatever comes. I did what I could." Sterling's arm came around her shoulders again, heavier this time, his strength clearly fading fast. "Then let's go. We need to cover as much ground as possible before sunrise." They walked into the forest, leaving behind the only home Reyna had known for 7 years, leaving behind the friends she might never see again, walking toward a future she couldn't predict with a man she didn't know. Sterling's weight grew heavier with each step, his breathing more labored, his skin burning hotter with fever. The silver poisoning was getting worse, his supernatural healing unable to cope with the damage while he was this weak. By the time the sun started to rise, Sterling could barely walk. Reyna had been practically carrying him for the last hour, her own strength running out, her muscles screaming with exhaustion. They'd made it maybe 5 miles from the Ironwood compound, not nearly far enough to be safe, not even close to Northern Crown territory. "We need to stop," Reyna said, her voice strained. "You need rest. You need food and water and treatment for those burns." Sterling shook his head stubbornly, trying to push forward. "Can't stop. Not safe. They'll have hunting parties out by now. We keep moving, or we die." But his legs gave out before he could take another step, and they both went down in a heap on the forest floor. Sterling tried to get up, his arms shaking with the effort, but he couldn't manage it. The silver poisoning had progressed too far, his body shutting down from days of torture and exposure to the metal that was toxic to his kind. Reyna knelt beside him, her hands hovering over his burned skin, desperate to help, but not knowing how. She'd learned basic healing in the mines, had to know enough to keep slaves alive since dead workers were worthless. But this was beyond her skill. Sterling needed a real healer, needed medicine and time and care that she couldn't provide in the middle of the forest while running for their lives. "Listen to me," Sterling said, his voice barely above a whisper, his ice-blue eyes finding hers. "In my left boot, there's a vial, emergency healing potion. Take it out." Reyna fumbled with his boot, finding a small glass vial tucked into a hidden pocket. The liquid inside glowed faintly blue, and when she uncorked it, the smell was sharp and medicinal. "What is it?" "Concentrated wolfsbane mixed with silver extract," Sterling said, managing a weak smile at her shocked expression. "I know, sounds like poison, but for silver poisoning, you fight fire with fire. The wolfsbane neutralizes the silver in my bloodstream. It'll hurt like hell, but it'll keep me alive long enough to reach my territory." Reyna helped him sit up enough to drink, supporting his head as he swallowed the potion in one gulp. The effect was immediate and violent. Sterling's body convulsed, his back arching as he screamed through gritted teeth, and Reyna held him as best she could while he thrashed. She could smell the silver being purged from his system, could see the burns on his skin starting to close as his healing finally kicked in properly. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, Sterling went limp in her arms, his breathing evening out, his fever breaking. He was still weak, still injured, but no longer on the verge of death. The emergency potion had bought them time. "Rest," Reyna said softly, brushing his platinum hair back from his face. "Just for a little while. I'll keep watch." Sterling's hand caught hers, his grip surprisingly strong for someone who'd just been convulsing. "You saved my life twice now, once in the mines and once just now. I owe you everything." "You don't owe me anything," Reyna said, trying to pull her hand away, but he held firm. "I did what anyone would do." "No," Sterling said, his eyes intense despite his exhaustion. "You did what most people wouldn't. You risked everything to free a stranger. You're either the bravest person I've ever met or the most foolish, and right now I'm too grateful to care which." They rested for 2 hours while the sun climbed higher in the sky. Reyna dozed fitfully, jerking awake at every sound, certain that hunting parties were closing in. But the forest remained quiet, except for birds and small animals, no signs of pursuit yet. Either the guards hadn't realized Sterling was gone, or they were planning something bigger than a simple search party. When Sterling woke, he looked better. His burns were still visible but healing, his strength returning slowly as his body recovered. He could walk on his own now, though Reyna stayed close in case he needed support. They moved faster than before, covering ground at a pace that would have been impossible with Sterling in his previous condition. "Tell me about yourself," Sterling said as they walked, his eyes scanning the forest constantly for threats. "How did you end up in the Ironwood mines? You're clearly not born a slave." Reyna hesitated, not wanting to share her story, but his tone was genuinely curious rather than demanding. "My pack was destroyed 7 years ago. The Ironwood pack wanted control of the river that ran through our territory. We refused to give it up. They massacred everyone, took the survivors as slaves." "What was your pack called?" "Moonwater," Reyna said quietly, the name painful to speak after so long. "We were small, only about 60 wolves total, mostly fishers and traders. We didn't stand a chance against Ironwood's warriors." Sterling's jaw tightened, anger flashing in his ice-blue eyes. "I remember hearing about that. The Council of Alphas condemned it, but did nothing to punish Ironwood. I was still learning to lead my pack at the time, not yet king, or I would have intervened." "Would you?" Reyna asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. "Would you really have gone to war over a pack of 60 wolves you didn't know?" "Yes," Sterling said simply, "because allowing one pack to massacre another without consequences sets a precedent. Because small packs deserve protection just as much as large ones. Because doing nothing makes you complicit in the crime. I've spent the last 3 years trying to force Ironwood to stop their slave trade, trying to negotiate peace while also preparing for war. Coming to their territory under a white flag was a mistake, clearly, but I had to try one more time before I brought my full army down on them." They walked in silence for a while, the forest growing denser as they moved north. Reyna found herself studying Sterling when she thought he wasn't looking. He moved with a grace that spoke of years of warrior training, his posture straight and alert despite his lingering weakness. He was handsome in a way that was almost intimidating, too perfect and powerful to seem entirely real. And he was the Alpha King, ruler of one of the greatest packs in the region, a position of power and responsibility that she couldn't even imagine, and he'd claimed her as his. The thought made her stomach twist with complicated emotions. Part of her was flattered, odd that someone like him would want someone like her. But a larger part was angry, resentful that he'd declared ownership without asking what she wanted. She'd been property for 7 years. She wasn't eager to become property again, even if the owner was kinder than her previous masters. "What did you mean?" she asked suddenly, unable to keep the question in any longer. "When you said I belonged to you. What did that mean?" Sterling stopped walking, turning to face her fully. "I phrased that poorly. I was weak and not thinking clearly. What I meant was that you saved my life, which creates a life debt under Moon Goddess law. And more than that, my wolf recognized you the moment you entered that room. Recognized you as mine, as my mate. I know you don't feel the bond yet, probably won't until we complete it, but I felt it immediately. You're my true mate, Reyna, the one the Moon Goddess chose for me." Reyna stared at him, her mind struggling to process what he was saying. True mates were rare, the stuff of legends and fairy tales. The idea that she, a former slave with nothing to her name but the clothes on her back and a secret gift she'd hidden her whole life, could be the destined mate of an alpha king was absurd. "That's not possible," she said, shaking her head. "True mates are 1 in a million. The chances of you just happening to be captured in the same mines where I was held, of me being the one on inspection duty that night, of everything lining up perfectly like that, it's not possible." "The Moon Goddess works in mysterious ways," Sterling said with a slight smile. "Maybe it was fate. Maybe it was divine intervention. Maybe it was just incredibly lucky coincidence. But it doesn't change what I felt when I saw you, what my wolf knew the moment you touched me. You're mine, Reyna, and I'm yours. That's not ownership. That's partnership. That's 2 halves of one soul finally finding each other." Reyna wanted to argue, wanted to tell him he was wrong, wanted to deny the small part of her that felt something when he spoke, something warm and right and terrifying. But before she could say anything, Sterling tensed, his nostrils flaring as he scented the air. "We need to move, now. There are wolves coming, at least 10 of them. Ironwood hunting party." They ran, Sterling's hand tight around Reyna's wrist as he pulled her through the forest at a pace she couldn't have maintained on her own. Behind them, she could hear crashing through the undergrowth, could hear the howls of wolves on the hunt. The Ironwood pack had realized their prize prisoner was gone, and they were not happy about it. "I can't outrun them," Reyna gasped, her lungs burning, her legs shaking. "Sterling, I'm not a warrior, I'm just an Omega." "You need to leave me and save yourself." "Not happening," Sterling growled, pulling her behind a massive oak tree and pinning her against the trunk with his body. "Listen to me very carefully. When they get here, I'm going to shift and fight them off. You're going to run north as fast as you can. Don't stop, don't look back, just run. When you cross into Northern Crown territory, my wolves will find you. Tell them you're with me, that I sent you. They'll protect you." "You can't fight 10 wolves alone," Reyna said desperately, her hands gripping his arms. "You're still weak. They'll kill you." Sterling smiled, and it was a terrible thing, all teeth and promise of violence. "I'm the Alpha King, Little Omega. I've fought worse odds and won. But I need to know you're safe before I can focus on the fight. Promise me you'll run. Promise me you won't try to help and get yourself killed." Reyna wanted to refuse, wanted to stay and fight beside him even though she had no combat training and would probably just get in the way. But looking into his ice-blue eyes, seeing the determination and certainty there, she found herself nodding. "I promise, but you better survive this, Sterling. I didn't cut all those chains just so you could die in the forest." He kissed her then, hard and quick and claiming, his lips crushing against hers, in a kiss that stole what little breath she had left. When he pulled back, his eyes were glowing with his wolf's presence. "Run, Reyna, and don't stop until you're home." Then he was shifting, his body expanding and changing, bones restructuring and fur sprouting, until where Sterling had stood now crouched a massive white wolf with ice-blue eyes. He was easily twice the size of a normal wolf, pure muscle and power and barely contained rage. He turned toward the approaching hunting party and howled, a sound of challenge and fury that echoed through the forest. Reyna ran. She ran like she'd never run before, her legs pumping, her heart racing, branches whipping at her face and catching in her clothes. Behind her she heard the sounds of battle, snarls and yelps, and the snap of breaking bones. She wanted to look back, wanted to see if Sterling was winning, but she'd promised him she wouldn't stop, and she wasn't going to break that promise. She ran until her legs gave out, until she collapsed at the base of a tree with her lungs burning and her vision spotty. She didn't know how long she'd been running, didn't know how far she'd come, didn't know if she'd crossed into Northern Crown territory yet. All she knew was that she couldn't hear fighting anymore, couldn't hear anything except her own labored breathing and the normal sounds of the forest. And then she heard the growl, low and threatening, coming from her left. Reyna's head snapped up to find herself surrounded by 6 massive wolves, all of them with fur ranging from gray to brown to black, all of them watching her with suspicious eyes. She scrambled to her feet, backing against the tree, trying to make herself as small and non-threatening as possible. "Please," she gasped, her voice raw from running. "Please, I'm with Sterling, the Alpha King. He sent me. He told me to run to Northern Crown territory and find his wolves. Please, I'm not a threat." The largest wolf, a massive gray beast with amber eyes, shifted in a fluid motion that Reyna envied. The man who appeared was tall and broad-shouldered, with gray-streaked hair and a scar running down the left side of his face. He was naked like all shifters after transforming, but he didn't seem bothered by it as he stepped toward her. "You're the slave girl," he said, his voice gruff but not unkind. "The one who freed our king from the mines. We've been tracking his scent for the last hour, picking up speed when we heard fighting. Where is he?" "He stayed to fight off the hunting party," Reyna said, pointing back the way she'd come with a shaking hand. 10 ironwood wolves. He made me promise to run while he held them off. Please, you have to help him. He's still weak from the silver poisoning." The gray-haired man's expression hardened, and he barked orders to the other wolves in a language Reyna didn't understand. 4 of them immediately raced off in the direction she'd indicated, moving at speeds that seemed impossible. The remaining wolf, a smaller brown-furred female, shifted to human form and approached Reyna cautiously. She was beautiful in a fierce way, with short brown hair and golden eyes that assessed Reyna with shrewd intelligence. "I'm Aurora, one of Sterling's elite guard. You're safe now. You're in Northern Crown territory. No one can hurt you here." Reyna's legs finally gave out completely, and she slid down the tree trunk to sit on the forest floor, all the adrenaline that had kept her going suddenly draining away. "Is he going to be okay? Sterling? Will he survive?" "If anyone can survive 10 against 1, it's our king," Aurora said, crouching down to Reyna's level. "He's the strongest alpha born in 3 generations. But I won't lie to you, he's been missing for 5 days and we know he was captured. If he's as weak as you say, this fight will be hard." They waited in tense silence, Aurora keeping watch while Reyna tried to catch her breath and stop her hands from shaking. Minutes crawled by like hours, every sound making Reyna jump, every distant noise making her fear the worst. She'd freed Sterling from certain death only to send him into a fight he might not survive. If he died out there, it would be her fault for not staying to help, for running like he'd asked instead of fighting by his side. When the 4 wolves finally returned, Sterling was with them in human form, supported between 2 of his guards. He was covered in blood, new wounds mixing with his healing silver burns, but he was alive. His ice-blue eyes found Reyna immediately, and he smiled, actually smiled, like finding her safe was worth more than winning the fight. "Told you I'd survive," he said, his voice strained but steady. "Though I'll admit, 10 on 1, while still recovering from silver poisoning, is not an experience I want to repeat." Reyna ran to him, not caring about the blood or the naked guards or anything except that he was alive. She crashed into him hard enough that the guards supporting him grunted with the impact, her arms wrapping around his waist, her face pressing against his chest. "You're an idiot," she said, her voice muffled against his skin. A complete and total idiot who could have died. Sterling's arms came around her, holding her close despite his obvious exhaustion. But I didn't die, because I had you to fight for, had to make sure you were safe before I could let myself collapse. The gray-haired man cleared his throat loudly. Perhaps we should continue this reunion somewhere more secure, like back at the palace, where our king can get proper medical attention and we can figure out what the hell happened. The journey to the Northern Crown Pack's main settlement took another full day of travel. Sterling insisted on walking under his own power despite his guards' protests, though Reyna noticed he leaned on her more than he probably wanted to admit. They talked as they walked, Sterling telling her about his pack and his duties as king, Reyna sharing carefully edited stories from her years in the mines. She still hadn't told him about her ability to touch silver, wasn't ready to share that secret yet, wasn't sure if she could trust him with something that valuable. The Northern Crown territory was beautiful in a way that made Reyna's breath catch. Towering pines and ancient oaks gave way to meadows full of wildflowers. Clear streams cut through the landscape, their water so pure she could see straight to the rocky bottom. And in the center of it all stood the palace, a massive structure built from gray stone and dark wood that looked like it had grown out of the mountain itself. Wolves in both human and animal form stopped what they were doing to stare as Sterling's party entered the main courtyard. Reyna heard gasps and whispers, saw shock and relief and joy on faces as the pack realized their king had returned. A woman with silver blonde hair and tears streaming down her face ran forward and threw herself at Sterling, sobbing into his chest about how worried she'd been and how she'd almost declared war on Ironwood. "I'm fine, Sage," Sterling said gently, patting the woman's back. "Shaken and burned, but alive, thanks to this woman here. Everyone, this is Reyna. She's the reason I'm standing here instead of dead in the Ironwood mines. She's to be treated with the respect and honor due to the woman who saved your king's life." The crowd's attention shifted to Reyna, hundreds of eyes examining her with curiosity and calculation. She wanted to hide, wanted to make herself invisible like she'd learned to do in the mines. But Sterling's hand was warm on the small of her back, steady and reassuring, keeping her grounded. An elderly man with white hair and kind eyes stepped forward, bowing slightly to Reyna. "I am Elder Marcus, head of the council. On behalf of the Northern Crown Pack, I thank you for returning our king to us. You'll be given a place of honor here for as long as you wish to stay." "She's not a guest," Sterling said firmly, his hand tightening slightly on Reyna's back. "She's my true mate and your future Luna. She'll be given quarters in the royal wing and treated as such." The declaration caused an uproar. Wolves started talking over each other, some excited, some skeptical, some clearly disapproving. Reyna felt her face flush with embarrassment and anger. Sterling had done it again, had claimed her publicly without asking what she wanted, had announced her status without her consent. "We need to talk," she said quietly, just loud enough for Sterling to hear. "Privately. Right now." Sterling must have heard something in her tone because he nodded and addressed the crowd. "I'll meet with the council in 2 hours to debrief. Until then, I need rest and medical attention. Dismissed." He led Reyna through the palace's corridors, his guards following at a discreet distance until they reached a suite of rooms that were clearly his personal quarters. The moment the door closed behind them, Reyna rounded on him, all her pent-up anger and fear and confusion bursting out. "You can't keep doing that. You can't keep announcing to everyone that I'm yours without asking me first. I spent 7 years as property, 7 years being owned and controlled, and I won't trade one master for another, no matter how pretty the chains are." Sterling had the grace to look ashamed, sinking down onto a chair and wincing as his injuries protested the movement. "You're right. I keep saying things the wrong way, keep trying to protect you by claiming you publicly when what I'm actually doing is taking away your choices. I'm sorry." The apology took the wind out of Reyna's sails. She'd expected him to argue, to insist that as Alpha King he knew best, to try to justify his actions. His immediate admission of wrongdoing threw her off balance. "I don't want to be claimed," she said, her voice softer now. "I don't want to be anyone's mate or Luna or queen. I just want to be free to make my own choices for the first time in 7 years." Sterling nodded slowly. "Then be free. I'll give you quarters in the guest wing instead of the royal rooms. You can come and go as you please, no restrictions. You can leave if you want, though I'd prefer you stayed where I know you're safe. And I'll court you properly, like I should have done from the beginning. Let you get to know me, let you decide if you actually want me instead of just accepting me because I declared you were mine." "And if I decide I don't want you?" Rhaena asked, needing to know. "If I get to know you and decide we're not compatible, what then?" "Then I'll accept your decision and find you whatever future you want," Sterling said, meeting her eyes steadily. "Whether that's a place in this pack as a healer or warrior or whatever role you choose, or safe passage to another pack, or resources to start your own life somewhere. I won't force you to be with me, Rhaena. The moon goddess might have chosen you as my mate, but you're still a person with agency and rights. Your happiness matters more than some cosmic prophecy." Rhaena studied him for a long moment, looking for deception or manipulation, searching for any sign that this was a trap. But all she saw was exhaustion and sincerity and hope. He meant what he said. He was actually giving her the choice to walk away. "I'll stay," she said finally. "For now, I'll stay and see what happens. But no more public claims. No more announcing my status without permission. If we're going to try this, we try it as equals, not as king and property." Sterling's smile was brilliant, transforming his stern face into something warm and genuine. "Equals. I can work with that." The next few weeks were an adjustment period that tested Rhaena's patience and Sterling's determination in equal measure. True to his word, Sterling gave her quarters in the guest wing and didn't push for anything more than conversation and occasional shared meals. He was busy with his duties as king, meeting with his council about the Ironwood situation and preparing for potential war. But he always made time to check on Rhaena and see how she was settling in. The pack's reaction to her presence was mixed. Some wolves were grateful that she'd saved their king and welcomed her warmly. Others were suspicious of an outsider being elevated to such prominence without earning it through pack bonds or loyalty. A few were openly hostile, particularly the unmated females who'd had hopes of becoming Luna themselves. Rhaena kept her head down and tried to stay out of pack politics, spending most of her time in the healing lodge where her basic medical knowledge from the mines made her useful. It was in the healing lodge that she met Willow, the pack's head healer. Willow was a tiny woman with wild curly hair and sharp green eyes that missed nothing. She was examining Rhaena's hands one afternoon, noting the calluses and scars from 7 years of mine work, when she paused over Rhaena's palms. "These marks," Willow said slowly, tracing the faint silver lines that crisscrossed Rhaena's skin. "These are from silver contact, but they're old scars, not fresh burns, and there are too many of them for occasional exposure. You've handled silver extensively." Rhaena's heart raced as she tried to pull her hands away, but Willow held firm. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do," Willow said gently. "You're silver blessed. You can touch the metal without it burning you immediately. It's an incredibly rare gift, maybe one in 10,000 wolves, and you've been hiding it." There was no point in denying it now. Rhaena slumped in her chair, defeated. "My grandmother told me to never tell anyone, said people would use me if they knew. I've kept it secret my whole life." "Your grandmother was wise," Willow said, finally releasing Rhaena's hands. "Silver-blessed wolves have been exploited throughout history, forced to work in mines or forge silver weapons or handle the metal in ways that would kill normal wolves. But here's the thing, child. You're not in the mines anymore. You're in a pack that values its healers, and a silver-blessed healer is beyond precious. You could purify silver poisoning by drawing out the toxin with your bare hands. You could handle silver-based medications that are too dangerous for other healers to prepare. You could save lives that would otherwise be lost. And Sterling? Reyna asked quietly. What happens when he finds out I kept this from him? You tell him yourself, Willow advised, before someone else does. Trust is the foundation of any relationship, especially one between mates. He needs to know who you really are, gifts and secrets and all. Reyna told Sterling that night over dinner in his private dining room. She'd been nervous about it all day, rehearsing what she'd say and how she'd explain keeping such a vital secret. But when she finally forced the words out, explaining about her grandmother's warnings and her fears of being exploited, Sterling just listened quietly until she was finished. That's how you freed me, he said slowly, understanding dawning in his ice-blue eyes. The silver chains. You cut through them without gloves, without protection. You should have been burned raw, but you weren't because you can't be burned by silver. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner, Reyna said, her hands twisting in her lap. I was afraid you'd see me as a tool instead of a person, that you'd value the gift more than the woman. Sterling reached across the table and took her hands in his, holding them gently. I value you, Reyna. The woman who risked everything to free a stranger. The person who warned her friends before running for her own life. The healer who spends her days in the medical lodge helping sick wolves, even though she doesn't have to. Your gift is remarkable, yes, but it's not why I want you. I want you because you're brave and compassionate and stubborn and perfect exactly as you are. Something in Reyna's chest loosened at his words. A knot she'd been carrying for weeks finally releasing. She'd been waiting for him to prove he was like every other male she'd known, someone who'd see her as property or tool or breeding stock. But Sterling kept surprising her, kept showing her that he saw her as a person first and everything else second. Thank you, she said softly, for not making me regret telling you. Over the next few months, Reyna fell into a rhythm at the Northern Crown Pack that felt almost like belonging. She worked in the healing lodge with Willow, learning proper medical techniques to supplement her rough mind knowledge. She made friends with other Omegas in the pack, including Aurora from Sterling's elite guard, who turned out to have a wicked sense of humor once you got past her warrior exterior. She explored the territory, marveling at the beauty she'd been denied for 7 years underground. And she spent time with Sterling. He courted her like he'd promised, with patience and care and genuine interest in getting to know her. They had dinner together several times a week, talking about everything from pack politics to favorite foods. He took her on walks through the forest, showing her the hidden corners of his territory. He made her laugh with stories about his elite guard's antics and listened seriously when she talked about her past trauma. She found herself falling for him despite her best efforts not to, falling for the way he treated everyone in his pack with respect regardless of their rank, falling for how he'd spend hours playing with pups in the courtyard, his dignified king persona disappearing in favor of childish joy, falling for the way he looked at her like she was the most fascinating person he'd ever met. But she was still scared. Scared of trusting too much, of giving someone power over her again, of losing the freedom she'd only just begun to taste. And she was scared of the mate bond itself, of being tied to someone so completely that she'd lose herself in the connection. It was Elder Marcus who finally gave her the perspective she needed. They'd been working together in the healing lodge, preparing medications for winter, when the old wolf set down his mortar and pestle to study her thoughtfully. You're afraid of the bond, he said, not a question, afraid of losing yourself. Reyna didn't bother denying it. I spent 7 years as property. The thought of being bound to someone, of having my soul tied to theirs, it feels like slavery with extra steps. Marcus smiled kindly. That's because you're thinking of it wrong. The mate bond doesn't take away yourself. It doesn't make you property or remove your agency. It simply means you and your mate are stronger together than apart. You still make your own choices, still have your own thoughts and feelings and desires. You're just never alone with them. You have a partner who feels what you feel, who supports you when you're weak and celebrates when you're strong. It's not slavery. It's the opposite. It's having someone who'll fight for your freedom as fiercely as they fight for their own. And if Sterling tries to control me using the bond, then he wouldn't be worthy of you and the bond would wither, Marcus said simply. True mate bonds only thrive when both partners respect each other's autonomy. Force or control breaks the connection rather than strengthening it. Sterling knows this. He's been trained since childhood in how to be a good mate, how to honor the bond without abusing it. And if he ever forgets, I give you permission to remind him loudly and with as much violence as necessary. Reyna laughed despite herself, imagining Tiny her trying to physically remind the massive alpha king of proper bond etiquette. But Marcus's words stayed with her, rolling around in her mind as she went about her days. The mate bond didn't have to be a chain. It could be a connection, a partnership, a choice to share strength rather than surrender it. 3 months after arriving at the Northern Crown Pack, Reyna made her decision. She found Sterling in his office, buried in paperwork related to the ongoing tensions with Ironwood Pack. He looked up when she entered, a smile immediately lighting his face in a way that made her heart skip. "Hey," he said, setting aside his work to give her his full attention. "Is everything okay?" "I want to complete the bond," Reyna said, the words coming out in a rush before she could second-guess herself. "I want to be your mate, your real mate, not just the woman you're courting. I want the connection, the partnership, all of it." Sterling was around the desk and pulling her into his arms before she'd finished speaking, his hold tight enough to make breathing difficult, but she didn't care. "Are you sure? We can wait longer if you need more time. There's no rush." "I'm sure," Reyna said, her arms wrapping around his waist, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her cheek. "I'm sure because you've spent 3 months proving that you see me as a person, not property. Because you've given me space when I needed it and support when I asked for it. Because every day you choose to respect my autonomy even when it would be easier to just command obedience. I trust you, Sterling. I trust us. So yes, I'm ready." The mating ceremony was held under the full moon 3 days later, with the entire Northern Crown Pack in attendance. Reyna wore a dress of white silk that Willow had made for her, simple and elegant, and nothing like the rags she'd worn in the mines. Sterling wore formal robes in the Pack's colors of silver and blue, looking every inch the powerful king he was. When they exchanged vows before the Pack and the Moon Goddess, promising to honor and protect each other, to be partners in all things, to choose each other every day for the rest of their lives, Reyna felt something inside her shift and settle. Like a piece that had always been missing, finally clicked into place. Sterling marked her first, his teeth sinking into the junction of her neck and shoulder, in a claiming bite that should have hurt, but instead sent pleasure racing through her entire body. The mate bond snapped into place like a rubber band that had been stretched too tight, suddenly released. She could feel Sterling in her mind, could sense his love and devotion and overwhelming relief that she'd chosen him. Could feel that he saw her as an equal, a partner, someone to be cherished rather than controlled. Then it was her turn to mark him, her much smaller teeth finding the same spot on his neck. Sterling's hands tightened on her waist, and she felt his pleasure through the bond, felt how much this moment meant to him. When she pulled back, their eyes met, and she saw her own wonder reflected in his ice-blue gaze. They were bonded, truly, completely bonded, 2 souls tied together by choice and Moon Goddess blessing. The Pack howled their approval, the sound echoing through the forest and across the territory. A song of joy and celebration and new beginnings that Reyna felt in her very bones. She was no longer a slave, no longer property, no longer alone. She was Luna of the Northern Crown Pack, mate to an alpha king who loved her, and finally free. But the celebration was interrupted by a commotion at the edge of the clearing. Guards were escorting someone forward, someone who was fighting and cursing and demanding to see the king. Reyna's blood ran cold when she recognized Maya, her friend from the mines, along with Finn and River and Asher and a dozen other former slaves. They showed up at the border claiming asylum, one of the guards reported. They say they're friends of the Luna and they need to see the king immediately. Sterling looked at Reyna, who nodded quickly. They're the slaves I warned when I helped Sterling escape. Let them through. Maya stumbled forward, tears streaming down her weathered face. Reyna, thank the moon goddess. We ran like you said, scattered into the forest. Most of us were recaptured within days, but some of us made it to neutral territory. We've been trying to get here for 3 months, trying to find you, trying to get to safety. Ironwood Pack is preparing for war. They're gathering allies, building up their forces. They mean to attack the Northern Crown to punish you for freeing their prisoner and to punish Sterling for humiliating them. Sterling's arm tightened around Reyna's waist, protective and possessive. Let them come. We'll be ready. And Maya, was it? You and your friends are welcome here. You're free wolves now, under my protection. No one will ever enslave you again. The months that followed were tense as both packs prepared for the inevitable conflict. But Sterling kept his promise about rescuing the slaves still trapped in Ironwood territory. He sent a special forces team, led by Aurora and including Reyna, who insisted on going despite Sterling's protests, to infiltrate the mines and free as many captives as possible. The rescue mission was dangerous and chaotic, and everything could have gone wrong. But Reyna's knowledge of the mine layout made the difference, and her ability to handle the silver chains meant they could free slaves faster than anticipated. They brought out 47 wolves that night, leading them to freedom while Ironwood forces scrambled to respond. The war came eventually, brutal and bloody and necessary. But the Northern Crown Pack fought with the righteousness of wolves defending the innocent, and slowly other packs joined their cause, disgusted by Ironwood's slave trade and treatment of captives. When the dust finally settled, Ironwood's alpha was dead, his pack scattered and disbanded, and his territory divided among the packs that had fought to free it. Years later, when former slaves came to Luna Reyna seeking guidance or hope, she'd smile and tell them her story. About cutting silver chains from a dying wolf who turned out to be a king, about choosing freedom over safety, about running toward a future she couldn't predict, about learning to trust again after years of abuse, about accepting love without surrendering autonomy. I was property for 7 years, she'd tell them, taking their hands in hers. I thought I'd never be free, never be more than a tool to be used and discarded. But the moon goddess had other plans. She gave me a gift I'd been taught to hide and a chance to use it for something good. She led me to a king who saw me as a person before seeing me as a mate. She taught me that the right partner doesn't take your freedom, they fight to protect it. She'd introduced them to Sterling, still tall and powerful, still looking at her with the same love and respect he'd shown from the beginning. He could have commanded my obedience, she'd explain. As Alpha King, he had the right to claim me as property under old pack laws. But he chose partnership instead, chose to court me and wait for my consent, chose to respect my autonomy, even when it would have been easier to just take what he wanted. That's how you know you've found the right person. They make you stronger, not weaker. They free you rather than trapping you. And those former slaves would leave her presence standing taller, believing a little more firmly that they deserved respect and partnership and love, that their past didn't define their future, that somewhere out there might be a king kneeling in chains waiting for them to set him free. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the channel for more werewolf romance tales featuring powerful alphas, determined omegas, and love that overcomes even the darkest circumstances. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Leave a comment below telling me what you thought of Reyna and Sterling's story and what kind of werewolf romance you'd like to see next. Your support means everything and helps me create more content like this. Thank you for reading, and I'll see you in the next story.